All right, I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic.
And my name is Howard Eber, and I am a recovered addict and alcoholic.
So welcome to, I almost said whacked out book study, way out book study, a way out book study. Um, so we've been going on this for a few weeks now. We're on study 22, and we're just getting into more about alcoholism, which is fine with me. So just to look at where we come so far is we've covered Doc's pain and Bill's story. There's a solution in those 37-ish pages. We've hammered home two aspects: the obsession of the mind that condenses the drink against our will, doesn't respond to reason, and the allergy of the body. That's the phenomenon of craving,
No, Mike,
which
turn it off.
oh, someone's unmuted.
Turn it off.
Um, which is overpowering craving for more once we start. So a life where our primary concern basically is the next drink. And so you would think after all those pages, we learned enough about alcoholism. So this chapter is called More About Alcoholism. And I guess the question is why do we need to know more about alcoholism? And why would it be after we agnostics, he hits us with the ABCs again, with some similar questions, because he wants us to be convinced, and that means certain without doubt. So, but the good news is this will be the last chapter when we talk about the symptom of alcoholism. This chapter finishes on page 43, and from 44 to roughly 103, where we cover it, there's nothing else that talks about drinking except I mean there's nothing else that really gets into it except union with God, and that's what this whole thing is about: the shattering of the ego and finding God within. So we're gonna go to page 30. So this is a very powerful paragraph, and when I work with a sponsee, it's just kind of like where I start with them, and then I'll explain what I do. But it says most of us have been unwilling to admit we're alcoholics. And notice it doesn't say incapable to admit. It says unwilling, which means not ready. You remember it says on, I believe it's 43, alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they commence to solve their problems. So step one is the beginning. If you're not seeing your badly mangled and damaged because of allergy obsession, I'm gonna, you're not gonna admit you're alcoholic. Remember, the foundation, step one is willingness. So most of us unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics. I would underline real alcoholic if you can. Um, and here's why we're unwilling. No person thinks he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Underline bodily and mentally different. Um, so bodily difference, of course, the allergy, mentally difference, of course, the obsession. But who wants to admit they're mentally different, for that matter, bodily different? We have an instinct called pride that we built up pretty strong, and that's the fear of what other people think of us. And it's hard to admit I'm mentally different. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, 9 years old, I was dyslexic. I didn't want anyone to know about it. A teenager, I didn't want anyone to know about it. A bipolar, I didn't want anyone to know about it. I didn't want to know about that. That was mentally different. And I told everyone, I don't want, it's close to me. So I painted a picture, nothing was wrong with me, and I hid behind that. And I walked in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want to admit I was mentally different because I was programmed to do that. And the fifth step promises say we pocket our pride. So things start to change. Let's keep going here. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless attempts to prove we could drink like other people. And how many times have we tried to prove? Countless vain attempts. Vain means without success. I wanted to be able to walk away from drinking. Just don't, swear it off, all that stuff. I want to be like everyone else, my friends, you know, which is why I'm willing to admit it. That's, it makes sense. The idea. So where our ideas started in our mind, right? The idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is a great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistent illusion is astonishing and may pursue its against insanity and death. So there's some more words there: control, obsession, abnormal, death. So like I said, when I take a person through this paragraph, I have them underline those words. And because you can't, I always tell them, you can't admit your powers over alcohol unless you know what alcoholic is. Now, up to us, we've been through these 38 pages, and so we know what a real alcoholic, who this book is written for. They don't respond to reason and the experience of our craving. We know that. Bodily different, of course, is abnormal reaction to alcohol. Mentally different, of course, is a recurring persistent idea of drinking. Control is the inability to influence or direct or stop a course of events. The inability, I'm sorry, the ability, that's control. And obsession, same as mentally abnormal, away from grace. And death is a cycle of drinking. It's not talking about being buried in the ground. So if those words from what we've done, if I was a sponsor, take you through that. So, but to go, I want to take this paragraph one step further. I want to go a little bit deeper on this paragraph. I'm going to change the word drinking to thinking. And just take wind of this when I go through this. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we're alcoholics. No person likes to think they're bodily and mentally different from us fellows. Therefore, I'm not surprising that our thinking careers have a counterfeit attempts to prove we could think like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his thinking is a great obsession of every abnormal thinker. Resistance to solutions astonishing and may pursue insanity and death. So thinking is it says the problem centers in the mind rather than the body. And I said this before. The mind that is the problem cannot overcome the problem. Self-will can overcome self-will. Sick mind can't heal a sick mind. Yet people in recovery all the time attempt to do that, trying to control their drinking with a hopeless mind. You know, and so there's some other words that we can look at since we looked at it from that angle. Idea. So idea is a thought of a new concept, something new. So it's the idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is a great obsession of every abnormal drinker or thinker, whatever you want to say it, but drinker. So what's the most commonly practiced program that we see? I don't even call it program, we see in AA. Is that people go to meetings, they stay dry, and they try to control and enjoy their drinking by not drinking one day at a time. I'm sure there's some people in here that tried that delusion, and it's insanity. When I took on the obsession, it always knocked me down. If there's one thing that tapped me out every time, it's the obsession. I could not fight it. And it was there if I was sober or not sober. What I discovered was if I was trying to control it, I wasn't enjoying it. And if I was trying to enjoy it, I wasn't trying to control it. So I had that reoccurring persistent thought that somehow, someday I'm control my drinking and be normal. Right. And it doesn't work that way. And the persistent delusion is, anyways. So the other word in there I'm going to point out to you from the thinking standpoint is illusion. It's a false perception of reality. We see optical illusions like Chris Angel, makes a whole car disappear. It's cool, but it's not real. Our illusion is that we will control and control it, and we will enjoy it. And our illusion is a result of an unsound mind. That's the erroneous belief that we can beat this game our own power. So it's a lie. I let it we pursue to the gates of insanity and death. And so insanity was the other word in there. And step two, it says restore to sanity. Now, if I didn't know Howard and I walked him up in the streets and I walked him and looked him in the eyes and he's out there in his insanity, and I said, hey, you need to be restored to sanity. That would mean that I'm implying that he's nuts, insane. And that is what Bill's very nicely telling us here, that we're insane. I didn't like being told that because I thought insane meant crazy. Crazy means full of cracks, permanently damaged, right? Like a glass falling out, of a window. It's done. Insanity means, so if sanity means soundness of mind, whole, complete, insanity must mean unsoundness of mind, not whole, not complete. So for years, I thought insanity was the crazy stuff I did when I was drinking. The war story stuff I heard people talk about at meetings. The insanity I'm talking about here, runs a little deeper. The insanity is about, the first drink, but it's the insanity of returning to alcohol in the face of overwhelming evidence that we shouldn't be doing so. All this stuff, whether drinking or not drinking, is a lie that we pursue to death, and we will pursue it unless we admit we're bodily and mentally different from our fellows. And then we take the action of 4 through 9. But until that, the insanity will live on and get worse and deeper and uglier. It's kind of like this. When you were a kid and you played tag you're it. Well, you're it until you do something about it. And this chapter is called more about alcoholism. It should be called more about the obsession, more about the first drink, because that's the main focus here. Howard, do you want to comment anything in those? I know some words in there you point out too. I think you're muted.
Yep, thank you. Joe and Charlie state that this chapter deals with one thing and one thing only, and that is the failure of self-will, the insanity of the first drink. For those who are like Bill, and we just finished Bill's story, some of us don't like this notion of a spiritual experience. And so Bill wrote this chapter to tell us what happens to people who don't have the spiritual experience. Now, step 2 states that, as Steve mentioned, that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Now, if you're like me, you may be offended by that, because I was. I didn't think I needed to be restored to sanity because of the first step. I wasn't drinking anymore. Therefore, I felt I was as sane as anybody else. Don't call me insane. Well, like so many other things, it's because I didn't understand the language. And thank God, Joe and Charlie taught me to use the dictionary. And I realized that the crazy, stupid things that I did when I was drunk, as Steve mentioned, were not insanity. Those were indications of intoxication. They were inebriation. When you get a head full of chemicals that lower your inhibitions, and that's what alcohol and drugs do, you're going to do some crazy, stupid things, but that doesn't make you insane. That makes you under the influence. So in that situation, I have to redefine my definition of sanity. And sanity, as Steve mentioned, is wholeness of mind, the ability to recognize the truth in any given situation. And that's the key here, is recognizing that sanity and insanity are the keys to what we're talking about here. Now, in this paragraph, Steve, I'm going to start around the middle of the paragraph, and I'm going to make some suggestions. If you follow me from where it says the idea that someday, somehow, he will control. If you see that, let's start there for a moment. The idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession. Please circle the word obsession. I'm going to ask that you circle 4 words in the next few lines and see if you can figure out why. Is the great obsession, let's circle that, of every abnormal drinker. Well, that applies to us. We are abnormal drinkers. If we define allergy as an abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or beverage, then we are abnormal drinkers. Much the same as somebody who has an allergy to strawberries is an abnormal strawberry eater. Well, we have an abnormal drinking problem. And that great obsession, and circle the word obsession, please, of every abnormal drinker, the persistence of this insanity, illusion rather, Circle illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity. Please circle the word insanity or death. We learned we had to, and there's a must, we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. That is the first step in recovery. Now, in a lot of workshops, this is where they do the first step. I don't. I prefer to do this, to take the first step on the first page of We Agnostics, but there's something to be said for doing it here. I just don't agree with it. But be that as it may, is the innermost, fully concede to our innermost self. Notice it doesn't say surrender. The word surrender doesn't appear in this book in the first 164 pages, not one time, not once. The word that Bill uses tends to be concede or concession, and concession is defined as absolute, total, unconditional surrender. So we're going way beyond surrender. We are going to absolute concession. Germany surrendered after World War I, but they still had an awful lot of resentments that they needed to work out. And they took it out on, well, on my people and a lot of other people over there. And they finally conceded after World War II. So there's a surrender and there's a concession. But let's get back to the important thing here that I was trying to point out about circling these words. This is the first step in recovery, the delusion, and please circle delusion, that we're like other people or presently must, maybe, because it comes back, has to be smashed. Has to is a must. Now let's look at the 4 words that I asked you to circle. Obsession, illusion, insanity, and delusion. Well, let's break it down. Let's define it. What is an obsession? We already defined obsession is an idea so strong it could make you believe something that's not true, right? An idea so strong that it overpowers the truth. So obsession is something that can make you believe in a lie, right? Next word, illusion. We all know David Copperfield, the illusionist. Steve mentioned, what's his name, the other guy. David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. I saw him do it. I watched it on TV. The Statue of Liberty did disappear. But did it? No. It was an illusion, because an illusion is seeing something that's not true, which means you're believing in something that's a lie. You're seeing something as true when it's actually a lie. So an illusion is seeing something. An obsession is a thought that could convince you to believe in a lie. And here's the third word, insanity. And as I said in the beginning, insanity is defined as belief in a lie. Insanity is belief in a lie. If sanity is the ability to recognize the truth, then insanity is belief in a lie. And here's the fourth word, delusion. Delusion is when you convince yourself of something that's not true. In other words, belief in a lie. I heard someone refer to delusion as psychotic wishful thinking. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. It is psychotic wishful thinking because you're convincing yourself of something that's not true. These whack jobs that say the idiot that shot John Lennon had a delusion about what was going to happen. He would be famous and he would be recognized, and that's a delusion. Some of the people that tried to kill some of our presidents, the same thing. They thought that they would be great, people would be grateful and people would be worshiping them. That was delusion. That is psychotic wishful thinking. We want something so much we convince ourselves we already have it. Is that not insanity? Delusion is we want something so badly that we convince ourselves that we've already got it, and we don't. So what is the point? What is the point of these 4 words? Obsession, illusion, insanity, delusion. 4 words, 2 paragraphs mean the same thing. Something that can convince us to believe in a lie. We're being set up in this chapter for a number of stories. Bill is going to be using a couple of examples to get inside the mind of the alcoholic just before we take that first drink, when we are stone cold sober, or as Joe and Charlie say, stark raving sober. And we ask, can that person see the truth about alcohol or not? And if they can see the truth, they're sane. And if they can't, they're insane. And like many great teachers, Bill uses examples. He uses these stories, factual or not. Jesus did the same thing. He made up fables as a way of making a point. And so in this chapter, Bill tells us of the man of 30, of Jim, of the jaywalker, and of Fred. Each failed to pursue a spiritual solution to their problem. And we're going to see if we can detect at what point in their story they crossed the line. They crossed from being sane, recognizing the truth, to being insane, which is making a decision based on a lie. We're going to see if they can or cannot tell the truth about alcohol. And remember, bottom line, it's the lie that imprisons us in this hopeless state of mind and body and spirit. And as the saying goes, it is the truth that sets us free. Steve?
I just want to go over a couple words there, and I like how you explained the conceit thing, because I always say, I use the word surrender, but I always say it's fully surrendering. It's going deeper than that, right? But the word I always like to point out, though, is he uses the word innermost self. And innermost, you think about what would that look like? Where would that be? It's if the innermost, let's say the innermost part of the ocean is the deepest section of the ocean, they call it the abyss. And it's what is it? It's the most beautiful part of it, where all the life of the ocean is, where all life, exists. Our innermost self is where deep down inside of us. Is he getting to something? You know, the most beautiful part of us, the part maybe where we find joy and peace, and so, again, the catch, like I mentioned earlier, this is in order to concede your innermost self, you need to know what an alcoholic is. They're not, they have to go deeper, and you have to really explain it. And but out of vital information, you're going to believe step one is about raising your hand in the meeting every meeting. And with the hope it's going to get better. But we must admit, we're mentally different, bodily different. That's the thing. And you know, that's what it means to fully conceive, innermost self, is unless we can see, that what's going on in my life and acknowledge it, you know, transformation is going to be hard to do. And, the short paragraph is where a lot of people, you see where, like how deep, how much more they need to go. You got to remember, step one doesn't require us to admit we're an alcoholic. It asks us if we're powerless over alcohol. And being powerless over alcohol means we have lost the choice when drinking, before we drink and after we drink. And I've heard people say it's step one's the only non-spiritual step. Look at that paragraph again and tell me it's a non-spiritual step. You know, it's because the reaction is going to be, I need power. Let's go back to the book here. And I like what he says here. We alcoholics are like men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. I remember those commercials on the info commercials at night. The guy would have the magic pill. And rehabs I work at, sometimes some guy would come in and try to sell us a pill. This is going to take away, to give you back control. All of us felt at time we were gaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, rarely followed by self-control, which led to pitiful and comfortable demoralization. Demoralization is the lowering of our spirit, feeling hopeless. Howard, you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, incomprehensible, we know what that means. We know we don't know what it means. But demoralization can also be defined as extreme confusion.
Right.
So if we look at it that way, incomprehensible confusion. How the hell did this happen again? Uh, that's the only thing I want to add about that. But one other thing you may want to bear in mind, I mentioned the use of those four words that meant belief in a lie. There's five word times on this page that Bill uses the word control. On about three or four paragraphs here, he uses the word control five times. The first time was up in the middle of the first paragraph where he says the idea that someday he will control his drinking. Well, Steve just read the second one. We alcoholics are men who feel we've lost the ability to control our drinking. There's control number two. And if you keep score, you'll see three, four, and five before Steve finishes the paragraph.
So, since we are convinced to a man that, or people will say, that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of progressive illness. It's interesting he uses the word progressive because alcoholism is a progressive on, all these different fronts. The obsession, the mind, you know, I mean, the obsession of the mind, the physical allergy, and of course, don't leave out the malady. You know, um, I always thought that when I held alcohol in my hand, I had control of it. The truth is, it had me. I was in the glass and it was holding me. Pretty deep. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. This is the part that got me. We are like men who have lost their legs, they never grow new ones. Neither does it appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried this every imaginable remedy. Another word for remedy is solutions. How many, I always ask the sponsees this question is, how many solutions have you tried? And they go, well, I go, better question is how many solutions have you tried outside yourself? Church, yoga, meetings, rehab, rehab. Another word for remedy is also, believe it or not, is medication. How many medications have you tried to beat this? We had, they put me on Valium one time. Remember we were this early in the early aspects. The cure for morphine was heroin. Then cocaine was a cure for heroin. That's good news for us. But the popular thing today is what? Oxy and, Suboxone and all this stuff. But there's antidepressants and all this stuff. Some people need them, but it's crazy. Another word for remedy is also therapy. How much therapy have you tried? I saw a therapist, during most of my my younger years, to my teen years, and into my addiction. You know, I was there. I never told the therapist the truth, but then I met a guy in AA, and I knew him 3 weeks, and I told him my whole life story. It didn't cost me a dime. Let's go back to the book. In some instances, there was been brief recovery, followed always by still less relapse. Again, what's your experience? Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing of making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but hasn't done so yet. Well, this is how many years later, and it still hasn't happened yet? Like I said, every few years there's a magic pill that comes up. This will take away your alcoholism. Howard, do you want to say anything on that?
Oh, yeah. Uh, the previous paragraph ends with Bill saying that we're in the grip of a progressive illness. And then the last sentence on that paragraph says, over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. And the key word there, I'm going to suggest you underline, is the word any, meaning drunk or sober, over any time. Our disease is progressive, whether we are drinking actively or not. If we are sober for 10 years and pick up a drink after 10 years, our body will react as if we've been drinking every one of those days in those 10 years. Why? because the disease is progressive. It continues to run parallel to us. And anytime we get out of our lane and into that lane, our body is going to react as if it has been drinking or using every day that we weren't drinking. And continuing, neither did there appear to be any kind of treatment then or now. As Steve mentioned, there hasn't been any treatment then or now that will make alcoholics of our kind. What is our kind? The desperate variety, the hopeless variety. Drink like other men. And why is that? Because powerlessness is a permanent condition. It's not transitory. Powerlessness is a permanent condition. It doesn't come and go. We have tried every imaginable remedy, and you may want to underline that. And why have we tried every imaginable remedy? Well, you may want to, right next to that, put see page 30, paragraph 1, which contains the sentence that says, the idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. That's why we've tried everything, because that's our obsession. Somehow, someday, some way, we will figure out a way to do this safely. We've tried every imaginable remedy. And as Steve mentioned, it says it is always, always followed by a worse relapse. Why? Once again, because it is a progressive illness. Bill, when he sinks his fetlocks into something, he repeats that point over and over again. This is about the third or fourth reference to progressive in this last paragraph. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree that there's no such thing as making a normal drinker.
Hmm.
Once a pickle, never a cucumber. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. Simple. Steve, you want to read or you want me to jump ahead?
I'm here. So one thing that's interesting is you put a real alcoholic and hard drinker next to each other, besides the difference of not having an allergy and obsession, is a real as a hard drinker, they'll jump out. I'm an alcoholic, almost like it's their calling card. Where a real alcoholic, they're the real deal and they won't admit to it. And look what it says, despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe in that class because we know we're dying. We know what it feels like. By every form of self-deception and experimentation will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. I'm not as bad as those guys. We're always comparing ourselves to people. If anyone who is showing the inability to control his drinking and just rather face it, drink like a gentleman, that means to control it. Our hats are off with him. Heaven knows we tried long enough to drink like other people. Hmm. You got anything you want to say on that, Howard?
Yeah, Bill is going to start going through what I call the allergy tests. He's going to give us 5 tests to see if if we have the allergy to alcohol. And this is test number 1, where he says to uh, to do your right about thing, right, a right about face, and underline drink like a gentleman. There's allergy test number 1. Whatever the hell that means. I don't know what drinking like a gentleman is. I've seen people drink like so-called gentlemen, and I'm not interested in that. As far as I'm concerned, that's alcohol abuse. When you get a drink and you spend 20 minutes going through some stirring ritual, and then you slowly sip it and get up from the table and leave, and half of the drink is still there. That's alcohol abuse. And that's what gentlemen drink like. And I ain't interested in that. So, drink like a gentleman is one of those alcohol tests. So, our hats are off to them. We have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. Any triers here? Yeah, you bet. There's plenty of us. Um, So, in the next paragraph, and Steve will get into it, let's look at the way we've tried to drink like other people. Okay? Attempts to control and regulate our drinking. You're about to run into the longest sentence in the book.
Well, you can read it, that paragraph.
Okay? Here are some of the methods we tried. See if you can identify with any of these. You may want to check them off as we go along.
You can also call these failures. These things you failed at.
Yep, absolutely. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone. The Harvard study that has the 20 questions for to decide whether you're an alcoholic or not. I don't know if you've ever seen it. A lot of meeting schedules have it at the beginning of their schedule of their book. It says, "Are you an alcoholic?" And it's got 20 questions. My favorite question is number 16 because it says, "Do you ever drink alone?" Now that depends. Who's buying? If I'm buying, yeah, I'm drinking alone. If you're buying, no, I'm not drinking alone. So that doesn't qualify me as an alcoholic or not. That just makes common sense to me. But in any case, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties. Any of these sound familiar to anybody? Yeah, you bet. Switching from scotch to brandy. Now, you might want to underline scotch to brandy and above it, write your choice. It doesn't matter what you switch from. Steve mentioned a few examples before. Switch from maybe alcohol to Valium. How about trying? I know it's going to piss some people off. The California treatment, which is smoking weed instead of drinking. I don't know how that got to be considered California because I've seen that everywhere. But in any case, substituting weed for alcohol.
Now it's
Substituting
called green and clean.
green and clean.
Yeah.
That's the upside of it. Okay. So it's your choice. You're switching from one thing to the other. I did that. When my drinking Jack Daniels got to be a problem, I stopped drinking Jack Daniels. I started shooting heroin because I figured that was a lot safer than Jack Daniels. And that got to be a problem. So I switched to take it to eating pills. And when that got to be a problem, I went back to good old JD because Jack Daniels never failed me. But the point is, we're changing seats on the Titanic. It's going down anyway. Drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, with or without a solemn oath. We've all seen Bill's family Bible, where he wrote basically, "This time I mean it. This time I really mean it. No, no, no. This time I really, really, really mean it." The Alcoholics National Anthem. "This time I mean it." That's our national anthem. Uh, Taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to forget about health farms and sanitariums, going to detoxes and rehabs. When was the last time somebody said, "I just got out of the sanitarium," or "I spent some time in the health farm"? Nonsense. Detoxes and rehabs. Accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. Once again, who was the last time you heard someone say, "I just got back from the asylum"? It's a rehab. Accepting commitment to asylums. Um, how about I want to add something there. All these things we tried, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. How about just going to meetings? We tried that. That hasn't worked any better than switching brands. We could increase the list ad infinitum without end. There's all kinds of other examples. Marijuana maintenance, how about drinking non-alcoholic beer, right? And it says on it, "Not for alcoholics." Or how about substituting prescription drugs for alcohol? Because, and I've heard more alcoholics get into trouble than anything else by saying, "I never had a problem with drugs. So it's safe for me to take these pain meds or these barbiturates or this Valium because I never had a problem with it." Well, let me tell you, every drug I ever had a problem with, at some point, I didn't have a problem with it. It always starts that way. So thinking because you're an alcoholic and it's safe for me to use these drugs is missing the point of what the doctor said in the doctor's opinion, that we cannot consume alcohol in any form whatsoever. In any form, whether we drink it, swallow it, smoke it, snort it, shoot it, shove it, doesn't matter how it enters our body. It could be powder, it could be leaf, it could be a pill, it could be something we drink. If it is a chemical that changes our perception of reality, it is alcohol in one form or another. Um, Steve, you want to go on?
I'll go ahead. Well, I'll start next paragraph. So, the next paragraph. I always I call it experiment number one because it's the number, and I don't mean it's the first experiment. I mean it's the most used. I mean the experiment you'll do the most in recovery. It says we do not like to pronounce anyone as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room, try some controlled drinking. Step over to the nearest crack house, try some controlled crack smoking. Whatever you need to do, right? Where or take grab your pills, try some controlled pilling, whatever it is. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it once more. Either way, this is what I throw in there. It will not take you long enough to decide for yourself. Here's the condition: if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of the jitters to get full knowledge of your condition. I mean, again, have you ever conducted this experiment? I mean, I did many times. Many of us have done it many times. If you look back and go, hey, yeah, I did do that. Some of us that have went to rehab and, or straight to AA and, could not fully admit, we have this allergy. So we go out and I get loaded again and I find, oh, maybe I do. Some guys will just say, I just picked up. And well, one guy came back to this one rehab and I go, what happened? He goes, I just picked up. And I'm like, you didn't learn anything here. You just picked up. Why? I don't know. Then he went on to experiment number one and he came back and his mind was changed. That will humble you really quick. I've seen it happen a lot. Says there's no way of proving it. We believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We've heard of a few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of overpowering desire to do so. Here's one. Howard, do you want to
Yeah. Um, I guess because I get a little bit more pedantic and anal than some other people. The step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking is to me test number two. If test number one was drink like a gentleman, then whatever that is, then test number two is step over to the bar room and try some controlled drinking. That's number two. Here's number three. Try to drink and stop abruptly. That's test number three. And because we're alcoholics, we're going to try it again because some variable was wrong in the first few tests. So here's test number four. Try it more than once because any good alcoholic is going to do that. It was raining out that day, so that doesn't count. I always drink more on rainy days. Or whatever nonsense we tell ourselves. The test was the problem, so we're going to do the test again. So number two is step over to the nearest bar room, try some controlled drinking. Number three, try to drink and stop abruptly. Number four, try it more than once because we will. And he said it's going to take it won't take long for you to decide if you're honest with yourself about it. These are just stages of progression. For what it's worth, number five, you have to jump over to page 34 on. If you want to take a minute, let's keep our place on page 32 and jump over to 34, page 34, paragraph one. The paragraph that begins with, as we look back, go down about 4 lines. Let him try leaving liquor alone for a year. If he's a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success. That is test number 5. So the book has 5 tests. There's a sixth. There's a sixth test. Marty Mann had her own test. Marty Mann said, and it's beautiful how she came up with this. Marty Mann suggested trying to drink 2 reasonably sized drinks. You pick the size. And again, don't fill up a bucket or make this to be an average sized drink, but an average sized drink. Take 2 of them a day for 30 days. No doubling up. You can't somehow pass up 5 days and then have 10 of those drinks. 2 reasonably sized drinks for 30 days and stop. If you're a real alcoholic, you'll never make it to that 30th day. And that was Marty Mann's test for alcoholism. It's in her book. Um, but Marty Mann, I'm sure you've heard of, was became the head of the founded the National Commission on Education for Alcoholism, which became the National Council on Alcoholism. She was Bill's sponsee. But we're about to get into some real fun areas here. Um, Steve mentioned here's one. We're about to get into an area where some of these stories, these 4 stories, are based in reality, are based in real people. 2 of them, somewhat so. One is complete fantasy. And here's one that Bill liberated from somebody else. And Steve, if you want to start, I can finish it up later.
It says a man of 30 was in a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambiguous to succeed in business, but saw he would go nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatsoever. He made up his mind that until he'd been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. I wonder if he, my question is, I wonder if he was a nice guy during that time. Anyways, um, then, then he fell victim to the belief, remember where beliefs come from. Then he fell victim to the belief that practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline has qualified him to drink like other men. Out came the carpet slippers and the bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital in the meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Even a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces and was dead in 4 years. So he died at 59 years old. You know, if you take a look at that, the progression started again, in 2 months after drinking again, he's in the hospital, confused, all that stuff, and it's all about the progressive nature there. Howard, you want to speak a little bit on that?
Yeah. Yeah, start. Thank you.
I
Uh,
knew
uh, the man of 30. Um, there's a gentleman that many of you have heard of uh, by the name of Richard Peabody. He wrote a book called The Common Sense of Drinking, which was probably the most popular book about alcoholism until the big book. This was out before the big book. It was very well read, very highly regarded. Richard Peabody was a lay professional. He was not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. He was a recovering alcoholic who incidentally died drunk, which is one of the reasons why this book was not as highly regarded in the end as it was in the beginning. But Bill Wilson knew about this book. Bill Wilson read this book. Bill Wilson took material from this book. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Let me put up this screen share for a minute. First of all, let's take a look at this, if you would. The whole chapter on more about alcoholism is broken down into these 4 stories. We're going to take a look at the first example, the man of 30. What was his lie? What was his delusion? What was his insanity? Well, he believed that long periods of sobriety and self discipline qualified him to drink as other men. Steve just read that. So, what did he decide to do? To prove that, out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. And what was the outcome? He went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. That's the story of the man of 30. But let's talk more about what I was referring to, which was Richard Peabody. Richard Peabody um, um, was involved in the Emmanuel movement. He wrote this book. He died in 1936, so he died before the big book came out. And much of the language and descriptions used in the big book comes from the common sense of drinking. If you don't have the book, pick it up and you'll see what I mean. But I'm going to give you some examples of that. This is what the book looks like. Here's a cup, and this is another book that he wrote, incidentally, Why Men Drink, but it wasn't as popular as the other one. But here's a couple of excerpts from Common Sense of Drinking. It says the man, after 36 years of living and approximately 16 of drinking, has definitely proved to his own conviction that he could not use alcohol without abusing it. And by his own efforts, he was equally powerless to stop his indulgence. We're talking about this guy, this man of 30. Let's go up to here. Some years ago, there lived a man who decided to give up drinking until he could make $1 million, at which time he intended to drink in moderation. It took him 5 years of sobriety to make the million. Then he began his moderate drinking. Out came the slippers and the bottle. And in 2 or 3 years, he lost all his money. Another 3, he died of alcoholism. Uh, I don't think it's a stretch to say that that sounds a lot like the man of 30. Let's go back to a couple other examples here. How about this one? Once a drunkard, always a drunkard. Now, in the early 30s, the word drunkard was used more often than the word alcoholic. So Bill took this and changed it from once a drunkard, always a drunkard, to the line that is used in the book, which is once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. How about a few other examples? Of course, a man who has had long periods of abstinence may, on a few occasions, be able to manage things pretty well when he resumes drinking, but sooner or later, depending on what the outside conditions, but still more on the stage of psychological deterioration, he will crash harder than ever. After periods of sobriety, we return to drinking, and what happens? We crash even harder than before. That's what Bill wrote in the book. How about this one? This time it's going to be different. How many times do you ever say that? You may hear him say, but you know him well, you smile. There are plans made to drink slowly, to take small drinks, to stick to. Does this sound familiar to what we just read? To stick to beer, the most futile of all. To prime first without, this is a horrible one, prime first with olive oil, and not to drink before or after certain hours, all in the long run of no avail. Again, exactly what we just read. Bill turned it into a little something else. Here's one. Does this sound familiar to you? Halfway measures are of no avail. That's a coincidence that Bill took the expression and made it into half measures avail us nothing? I don't know. A little bit of a stretch to think that's a coincidence. And that's just a couple of examples I wanted to give you of who this guy is and where some of these came from. Um, but as Steve read, once he started, he had no control at all. That was the truth. That was the thing that showed he had the allergy. Um, and again, every attempt failed, and he went to pieces and quickly died within 4 years. We're talking about a guy who was beyond human aid. How do I know that? Because it says every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. So if we remember that this whole chapter is about the failure of self will, here's an example of that. Everything that money could buy was at his disposal, and every attempt failed. Why? Because he was beyond human aid. And he went to pieces quickly and died within 4 years because the end is always the same: jails, institutions, and death. Simple. Steve, you want to take the next one?
Well, here's the thing is, what I'm talking about, the other thing about Peabody is he also used the italic writing in there. And, like the big words and powerlessness and maladjusted to life and root of the trouble, half measures, like Howard mentioned, half measures nothing. He used the term alcoholic, but didn't mean it that way. Very similar to the first 43 pages of this book, but it's also a book contained weird stuff in it, like staying sober. It's about teaching yourself emotions under control, rigid scheduling, working hard, and finding the right job, inspiration. You know, we sit there and we look at this guy. Why are we even talking about him? Because the most influential thing he gave AA was was the fact that he died. And the fact is, he was the most prolific writer on alcoholism at the time. You know, he died at age 44, 5 years after his groundbreaking book came out. 8 years after he got sober. All the self-knowledge in the world. That's the truth. That's the biggest thing Peabody gave us. I mean, it influenced Bill's writing, yes. So yeah, let's read this last couple paragraphs and we'll close out. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us believe that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could therefore drink normally. We've all had that dream, you know. Um, but here's a man at 55 found he was just where he left off at 30. We had seen demonstrated again and again. Once alcoholic, always alcoholic. That's Howard mentioned the pickle theory. You can't turn a pickle back into a cucumber. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we were in short time as bad as ever. If you're planning to stop drinking, there must be, it's like he sums up all the stuff he said in this one sentence. If we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no lurking notion of any kind. I mean, there must be no reservation or no lurking notion at any time that will someday be immune to alcohol. That's why I say step one is the only step you must do 100%. That doesn't mean abstinence like people in the fellowship think. It's saying you need to know that you had no lurking notion that one day you can drink like a normally again. No reservations. That's why, he devotes all these pages to step one, you know, and that's it. I mean, we'll stop there and be back next week. I'm going to stop the recording. Do you have anything you want to
Hang
say?
on, hang on, Steve. Let me just add something here because the paragraph you read it has an interesting point in it. It says it contains a powerful lesson, contains the truth. The truth is the truth that if he remained sober for a long stretch, he could drink normally. Is that the truth or is that the lie? Later on, he tells us the truth. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in short time as bad as ever. So the question I'm presenting is what killed him? The truth or the lie? The lie was that I could return to drinking if I stayed sober for a period of time. That's the lie. It's not what killed him. What killed him was the truth, which was that once he returned to drinking, he was in short time worse than ever, and it killed him within 5 years. That's what killed him. The lie didn't kill him. It's the truth that killed him.
Well, and one thing I want to say is too is that in short, there's that we had no reservation, and one day we've been meeting over alcohol, and I, always an alcoholic, and I had a really good family member who was a predecessor to me getting into AA, and I didn't know that he wasn't a book thumper guy or anything like that. But then when I got sober, he talked to me, and he was a big time churchgoer. And within 3 years, after 11 years of sobriety like that, he decided he could drink wine. He was dead in 2 years, you know, and this is stuff like that happens all the time. And we've seen it happen over and over and over again in AA. Call yourself, green and clean, whatever, or whatever you want to do, and people do that stuff. But I've been doing this 25 years, and I've yet to see someone win that experiment of, you know, I'm just gonna have a few drinks. Or they always say, at least I'm not doing drugs again. And the next thing you know, they're doing drugs again. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. We'll chat. Oops. I did the wrong thing. I almost ended the meeting.